Hello, Don Sands, in here from Don the Stat as we build up to the 2026 AFL season. It's a game against the Hawks. We're just over a month away from that happening. As we're all pretty excited about what could happen in 2026, there are still a lot of questions out there, particularly for a team like Essendon. And so what I've come up with here is 5 burning questions for Essendon in 2026. As Donald Rumsfeld once said, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. Known knowns for Essendon obviously are things like the age of the list, the profile of the list, the turnover that the list has had in the past few years, the performance over the last 3 years, the injury crisis. We know all these things have happened, and that gives us an idea, a sense of where Essendon could go in 2026. There are the unknown unknowns, and that's obviously how is season 2026 going to play out. And we're not actually going to know until we get to that point. And then there are the known unknowns. So these are the questions we legitimately have about the Bombers heading into this year. And this is what this episode is about. What are the sort of things that we're going to be looking at in terms of Essendon in 2026, and what sort of answers might we get? So there are countless questions that could be asked about the Bombers in 2026, but I've focused on 5 that I think are really important to how the Bombers are going to perform all this season, and that's what we're going to get into. I've avoided the low-hanging fruit, so there's no question about Brad Scott and his coaching tenure, no questions about Zach Merritt. How's he going to play, and is he going to ask for a trade at the end of the year? Obviously, the injuries, and will there be a repeat of the injury crisis? These are things I'm sure will be discussed at some point during the year, but we're not going to focus on that today. So let's get into it with question number 1. And question number 1 is, can the Bombers find any way to fill the Nic Martin hole in 2026? So talked a little bit about this on the pod and when we did our draft preview. Every team needs that sort of player that can really take a match by a scruff of the neck and perform in key areas of the ground, and it really can be the difference in winning games. Often the difference between a win and a loss is the performances of these players. You know, you think about the best of the players over the last decade. You think about your Dustin Martins, you think about your Patrick Dangerfields, your Marcus Bontempellis. These are players who can really, with their own will and their own skills, really shift the performance of a team and get them over the line. And we don't really have that at Essendon. Zach Merritt, obviously, as great as he is much more of that consistent across a game player. He's not the sort of player that generally lifts his performance and provides that real point of difference when it's crucial. So for Essendon, we're really projecting Nic Martin to play that role. And he was showing a lot of signs that he could do that, because he was a player who could go into the middle, have a real impact in terms of winning the ball with his really good ball use and smarts, create opportunities to score while also being a goal threat himself. I think back to the 2024 match against Melbourne, which obviously was a loss for Essendon. But in sort of that back half of the last quarter, it was really Nic Martin who was trying to drag Essendon back into a winning position. Obviously, we lost that game, but the way he played that game is the sort of performances you need from top-level talent that can be the difference. And obviously, you do need other players around him and better consistent performance. But who is going to play that role for Essendon in 2026? So with Nic Martin out for that year, who is going to step up for Essendon in sort of that match winner role? And it might be that no one ends up stepping up, and we're waiting for Nic Martin's return in 2027. Obviously, we've drafted Sullivan Roby, and I think of all the players that we've drafted last year, he's the one that projects as that sort of Martin Dangerfield type that can impact in the middle and go forward. But we can't expect him to do that role in 2026, particularly coming off his hotspot in his back. I doubt we see him for the first half of the season at senior level, and you really shouldn't be relying on a first-year player to do that. So I have 3 candidates who could potentially fill this role in 2026, and the first is Mason Redman. Now, this is a bit of a long shot, and I think history suggests that he probably can't perform this role, but in terms of his size, in terms of his competitiveness, in terms of his ability to, on his own merits, will the team over the line. Those long goals from 50, they're real team lifters. That's the sort of thing you want to see from this sort of player. We did see him try in the middle at the very start of last year in that first game against the Hawks. It didn't work out that well. So I think it's a very low probability that Mason fills that role in 2026. There has been a lot of good talk about the way in which he's carried himself around the group as he's stepped up in those leadership roles. So potentially this could be him. But I think in terms of the sort of player that he could be, he could do this, but it's not a low chance for me. My next candidate is, of course, Nate Caddy. We've seen really good signs of Nate and his performance, particularly in big games. I think back to the Anzac Day game last year where Essendon was falling behind, and it was sort of Nate Caddy in that last quarter that was really trying to keep Essendon into it. I think about the Brisbane game, in the way in which we came back into that. Nate Caddy was really crucial in the way in which we performed in that game. Obviously, both of those games are losses, but you have someone there in Nate Caddy who can be that match winner. The thing that goes against him in terms of being that Nic Martin type match winner is he's not going to be the player that's go into the middle, not necessarily go into the contest, but as that sort of player that can really turn a game, he could be that player. I don't see it necessarily for next year. I think he's still probably in a consolidation phase. We want to see him sort of getting up to this 30, 35 goal mark a season and sort of focusing on his role as a forward, but he obviously could project forward as that sort of match winner player in future years. So my number one candidate to fill that Nic Martin role is Sam Durham. I think Durham ticks a lot of boxes in terms of this role. He's able to go into the middle. He's able to win his own ball. He's able to break from stoppage with his power and his pace. He's really good overhead, so he can take those contested marks, and he's shown that he can hit the scoreboard. And he's obviously fearless. That's got him into trouble once or twice with suspension. But I really think that of all the players on the list outside of Nic Martin, Sam Durham does project as that potential match winner. Things to him that are issues. He does tend to drop in and out of games. He'll have, really strong patches of quarters, and then he'll have an off quarter in the next one. He's obviously continues to get better and better. Another that's been recognised for his leadership by being elevated to the leadership group. So if anyone is going to be that match winner player on the Essendon list in 2026, it's going to have to be Sam Durham. He's going to carry a pretty heavy load there, but he has the attributes that could be that player for me. It might be someone else from this list. If no one emerges to sort of play that role on a consistent basis, like Nic Martin was tending to do, then we might find that those sort of close games where you're relying on a lot of individual acts and individual brilliance, Essendon might end up on the losing side of those as opposed to the winning side. Moving on to question 2, and will Essendon in 2026 be exposed in the ruck? We obviously have made a decision at Essendon to forego our experienced rucks. Todd Goldstein was not offered a contract. Sam Draper was allowed to go as a free agent. He could have gone if he wanted because he was an unrestricted free agent, but we obviously didn't try a huge amount to keep him. I'm fairly happy to see him go. Obviously, that ended up resulting us with 3 trades, getting a third top end pick. So they've made a choice there. What's that left is that Essendon is probably the most exposed side in terms of ruckman in the competition. We've talked a lot on Donnerstadt about how history shows you don't need a great ruckman in order to be competitive and win flags. If you look at the history of results, or history of premiers, it's very rare that the All-Australian ruckman is in that premiership team that year. However, you do need a good ruckman. You need someone who can stand up to a battering, hold their own at the very least. And I think that's a real big query for Essendon this coming season, particularly because of the nature of what we've got. We've probably got the least experienced senior ruck division of any side in the competition. And that has real concerns for how Essendon may perform in 2026. I think you can get a really good sense of what that looks like if you think back to the Fremantle match last year, which was Vigo Vicentini's debut. Obviously, we're really excited about what Vigo showed in that game, some of his actions and his tackles. But his opponent, Luke Jackson, was best on ground, okay, and was really dominant in terms of setting the tone for the game. We saw it similarly in Vigo's second match against GWS, where Kieran Briggs, not a world beater, probably not going to make All-Australian anytime soon, but Briggs really dominated that game. And I think that is a potential for what could happen in a lot of Essendon games heading into 2026. And that has implications for how we play and how games are actually going to play out. Are we going to fall behind in terms of, having to play from behind a lot because the opposition is getting first use of the ball? So we've obviously got 3 main options there. Blackerson is probably going to be the one that starts, given his fitness. Given Brian doesn't look like he'll be coming back for 4 or 5 rounds at the very least at the start of the season, coming off his ACL. There's a lot to like about Blackerson, particularly his athleticism, and there's a potential that the new ruck rules will benefit him. His athleticism around the ground, from what I've seen at training, is also really impressive. He's really good at working into space and providing options there. So that could be really valuable. But we are relying there on someone who is only in his coming off his first full preseason. He hasn't really played any senior games in the ruck or even any VFL games in the ruck. He obviously played ruck as a waffle player, but there are still question marks about how he'll go at senior level. Nic Martin, again, coming off his ACL, you probably shouldn't be expecting too much early on, or at least for the first half of the season. They've obviously made a decision when they allowed Draper to go, or they didn't push hard for Draper to go, that they were going to back Nic Martin in as sort of that number one ruck, or give him the opportunity to do it. My concern with Nic Martin is that he's shown a lot at VFL level, and he's a very good VFL level ruckman. I don't think I've ever seen his VFL game translate to AFL level. And that's really the concern I have for Nic Martin. Obviously, again, he hasn't had a whole lot of opportunity. He's had a lot of games where he's been, sharing the ruck load, say with the Draper. And so that means he hasn't really had the opportunity to take the game by the scruff of the neck. That would be my concerns for Nic Martin, particularly coming off an ACL. Can he do that? Then there's obviously Vigo. Vigo's really promising, really like what he showed in his 2 AFL games, but I still think he's 1 or 2 years off from being a senior AFL ruckman. And again, so what that will mean is that, if Blackerson doesn't work out or Nic Martin comes back really slowly, we're going to be exposed in the ruck. Does that mean that we just set up our team to be losing the ruck and trying to play that way? That is a possibility, but again, you're playing with fire there. You'd much rather have a ruckman that at the very least breaks even, or can even get win taps for you and give you that first use and first opportunity. So that's another big question for Essendon in 2026. Moving on now to question 3. How will having 2 genuine wingmen benefit the Bombers? And I think what's happened over the past couple of years is that we've really seen increased awareness of the importance of the wing role and the specialised nature of the ring role. Okay, the AFL hasn't helped themselves with the way in which they pick the All-Australian sides, and they just pick extra midfielders on the wing. But the best wingers are specialised, and they know how to play the particular ring role. It's a really structurally important position, particularly in terms of keeping width. It helps keep your defensive and also offensive structure structurally sound if they're doing their role correctly. They really need to be that link in that offensive and defensive chains. They need to provide outlets, work really hard for that. So obviously they need to be really fit. They need to contribute both ends of the ground. We've seen that with Xavier Dersman getting back as well as going forward and kicking goals. And they also need to be aware that they might not get used. The game might not be played out on their wing. And so they might go long periods of the game where they're not actually involved. And that can be a bit of an ego harming thing for some players, because these are the best of the best. They want to be involved as much as possible. So good wingmen need to be able to put their egos aside and do what's best for the team. So you can't really just put anyone there anymore. You've really got to have specialist players. And, I think I'm a big fan of Xavier Dersma. I've loved what he's done on the wing for Essendon over the past couple of seasons. He has had some down games where he's had really poor performances, but the majority of the time he's playing that wing role to perfection, getting back as that defensive, or that into the last line of defence, and pushing forward and being able to kick goals. We've tried to run, a whole range of different players on that other wing: Harry Jones, Nick Cox, Thada Hooley, Luam Lual. All have had flaws that have meant that they have not been able to perform at the best of their ability, and that means Essendon's been exposed on one of our wings. Bringing in Braden Fiorini, who, whilst at VFL level, he can play as a midfielder. What he's shown in his AFL time is he's a really team-first player. I think that's also reflected in the way in which he's been elevated to the leadership group. He plays a team role. He could be the sort of player that would want to go in and win his own ball, but he recognises that for the betterment of the team, he needs to play that particular wing role, and he's almost going to be like a mirror of Xavier on the other thing. And that's really important for the way in which Essendon sets up, the way in which we play. And we've talked for so long about how concerned we are with Essendon's offensive transition and particularly our defensive transition. And what the defensive transition problems have been is that there's always been holes in Essendon's defensive setup that have been exposed by oppositions and allowed them to move the ball forward and kick a score. Now that we've got 2 people who know how to play the wing and 2 people who play team first football in Xavier Dersma and Braden Fiorini, and hopefully they both get through a full season, I think that's going to have a big impact on Essendon's defensive transition. Not only with the way in which they play, but the way in which they direct teammates around them and help teammates sort of orientate themselves as to where they need to be in that defensive structure. So I think that's really important. And I think that's going to have a major impact on both the offensive and defensive transition. Obviously, you have to run some other people through there. Angus Clark will probably spend some time there. Maybe even a Kyle Langford might move back up to the wing where he's sort of playing about 5 years ago, which is going to be built on something I'm talking about in my next question. So I would expect that Essendon's defensive transition will improve because of the nature of these 2 players and the role that they'll play there. Moving on to question 4. And this is probably the biggest selection dilemma for me in terms of picking a side. Will Essendon pick the most talented forward line or the best structured forward line? I think for the Bombers, if you lined up the players in order of talent and what sort of performance you would expect from players at the AFL level, you would expect Essendon's most talented forwards to predominantly be talls, right? So you're talking about Peter Wright, you're talking about Kyle Langford, you're talking about Nate Caddy. Probably have Kako in the mix there in terms of the top 4 Essendon forwards, but you're looking at a really tall forward line. Then sort of the next rung down, you've got players like May, you've got Nic Martin, you've got Edwards, if he comes back from his injury. You've got Harry Jones. Nick Cox has looked his best as a forward in the last couple of years when he's played. Archie Perkins as sort of that mid-size forward. You're probably wanting to run, say, a Sullivan Roby over 190 centimetre player in that forward line as well as you sort of integrate him into the AFL system. It's a very tall mix in terms of the best talent. And I think another one of the problems that Essendon's had over the past few years is the inability to sort of lock that ball in and also be dangerous. We had that period in 2024. We were really good at locking the ball in, but we couldn't create scoring opportunities because we didn't have the players who could take advantage of the ball being chaos in those areas because we were so tall in that forward line. And Essendon's delivery into the forward line hasn't been the best to be able to take advantage of those talls. Probably the best our forward line has looked in the last season or so was that sort of third quarter against Geelong when we sort of went chaos and we didn't try and hit targets, or we were just trying to get the ball in, create opportunities through that way. I think for Essendon, if you, as I said, for a lot of the best 23s that I've seen, you're picking all of Caddy, Wright and Langford to play in that forward line. Then you're adding a Perkins or a Roby, and really only the small forward that you're playing is Kako. And that's the big concern for Essendon, because if you're playing such a tall forward line where you've got Caddy, Wright, Langford, and then probably a Perkins or a Roby, with Kako as sort of that key small forward, you're really going to be exposed if you can't take marks. Because once the ball hits the ground, it's going to be a lot more challenging for those players to lock the ball in than it would be for other sides. I think we've seen with the way in which other sides are playing and the best sides are playing, they've got that fleet of small players that can create goal scoring opportunities from nothing, and they're really good at providing that pressure to stop the opposition from moving the ball out of defensive 50. And so for me, that should mean that Essendon should really be looking at picking a forward line that focuses more on those smalls. You will need one or two talls, and Caddy will pick himself as that up and comer. You're probably picking Peter Wright because that he will also function as that second ruckman as a backup. That really gives me a lot of question marks about where Kyle Langford plays. We know that he's played well as a forward over the past couple of seasons, or before the last one with his injuries, but is having all of Wright, Caddy and Langford in the forward line the best for Essendon going forward? Is Langford someone that you can move up the ground? Because you really should want some of his talent in the side, but for the best forward line that's going to benefit Essendon's ability not only to score, but to restrict the opposition from moving the ball out of our forward line, does he have to play further up the ground in a different role so you can provide space to play, three? I would be looking to play 3 of Kako, Gresham, Alashka, Guelphy, Unwin. These sort of players, whoever the best 3 performing of those 5, I'd be wanting to have in the side as much as possible so that you can create a forward line that can take advantage of ground ball and can restrict the opposition from moving the ball out of our forward line. But that would mean that you're not picking some of the most talented players or the best players there. So I think that's a real conundrum for Essendon heading into 2026. My final question is, I've seen a lot of training and I've heard a lot of training reports, and there's a lot of talk about Essendon's ball movement and how there's a lot of focus on really quick ball movement. So my final question for Essendon heading into 2026 is, can training for quicker ball movement translate to AFL games? Helmut von Moltke, the famous Prussian general who led the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War of the 1870s, famously said no battle ever survives contact with the enemy. More recently, 20th century philosopher Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And this is what the issue is for me. Can all this planning we're doing around faster ball movement actually survive when we come up against AFL opposition? And the thing for me is that looking at the preseason in 2025 and listening to what people were saying, the focus on faster ball movement was there as well. There's a lot of build up in terms of Essendon is looking to move the ball quicker. There's a lot of focus on playing on. There's a focus on getting rid of the ball within 1 or 2 seconds, taking the first option. And when we got into the season and we got up against AFL opposition, that didn't happen. And so that, again, concerns me that we're going through this. Will we actually be able to do it at AFL level? Because it's not necessarily about being kamikaze, Matthew Knight style, just bang it forward and hope. But the ball movement and the pace of the ball movement is hurting Essendon because it's costing them opportunities to score. It's costing them opportunities to get territory. And that's contributing to the fact that we're not finding it easy to score. And it means that we can be exposed going the other way. And that partly not only has to do with the people behind the ball, that has what people are doing ahead of the ball. Are they working hard enough to provide options to allow for that quick ball movement? So it's a whole of ground thing. It's not just the back line's responsibility to move the ball quicker. It's about those players forward working hard enough to provide those options or to create space that allows for that quicker ball movement. And we still have questions about Essendon's ball movement. We do have some good ball users in the back half, Jordan Ridley and Zach Reid, if they stay fit. We don't really have a lot of pace to be able to break lines. We really since McKenna and Sard have left, and we had Nick Hind for a little bit, we haven't had that pace there. We do have Sardo Hooley, who could provide that pace, and I think we saw that on his debut when he came on as a sub. But in his following games since then, we really didn't see it enough. So don't really have that pace from the back line. You got players like also Jacob Farrow and Max Contagianis have been brought in as those good ball users from the back half. So from the way in which we've structured the list, we're looking to, have quick, efficient ball movement by foot, not necessarily by running. But you kind of want to have all those options so you can move, if one aspect isn't working, then you can try, get someone who can break the lines like that. So we still really lack those line breaking runners that can contribute to fast ball movement in our back half. But again, this is a concern for me. As much as we were encouraged by the way in which the ball is being moved at training, will that actually stand up to AFL oppositions? And can they be brave enough? I feel like there's a bit of self-preservation in the way in which Essendon would move the ball, not wanting to get hurt the other way. Hopefully, the conditions can be created where the players are confident enough to be able to try and move the ball quickly, even if there are mistakes sometimes, because eventually, if you continue to allow that and continue to build on that, that should result in better gameplay from Essendon, the ability to put on more scores, and hopefully result in more wins. Well, those are my 5 burning questions as we head into the 2026 season. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions about these, or if you've got any of your own burning questions that you want to share, please do so in the comments below. If I get enough good ones, I might actually respond to them as well in a later video. Once again, thanks for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back with regular episodes soon of the podcast. Till then, as always, stay safe and go Dons.